Hey folks, defenders of capitalism will often make an argument that sounds something like this. They'll say, look, the people that are wealthy in the United States, they worked really hard to get where they are, right? And what socialists want to do is they want to take their hard-earned wealth away from them, right? That these millionaires and billionaires worked their whole lives to get where they are, and socialists just want to take everything they've worked so hard to get and redistribute it to everybody. And even if this were moral, and they say it's theft, but even if it were moral, they argue, it eventually collapses because eventually you run out of other people's money, right? And that socialism collapses because those who've worked so hard to create all this wealth, they stop creating it, and eventually you run out of other people's money. I know Margaret Thatcher famously said socialism doesn't work because eventually you run out of other people's money. Well, this argument is not correct, it's inaccurate, it's false, and it's false for two reasons, which I'll go over very quickly. First of all, if you want to know who really rules the United States, if you want to know who really has the wealth and power, if you look at who the elites are that really dominate the global capitalist economy, those folks did not work hard to earn their wealth to get where they are. Now, I know immediately everyone's thinking about like Oprah, right? She grew up in a low-income household. She became very wealthy. Well, Oprah is not one of the people that runs the United States. People are probably thinking about Steve Jobs or somebody who had some invention and became very wealthy. Well, those are not the folks that really run the United States. If you want to know who really runs the United States, you got to think about entrenched circles of power. These elite families that have really had wealth and run the country almost from the beginning, right? You can think about the DuPonts, the Carnegies, the Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts, the Morgans, the Rothschilds. These entrenched circles of wealth and power in the United States that have really been here from the beginning. I mean, they're not on the Forbes list of the richest people in the world because they're not poor. In fact, the people that are on the Forbes list, you could argue that they're so poor they actually have to keep their money in their own name. I mean, if you want to know who really has the power in the United States, if you want to know who really runs things, you have to look at the big banking corporations, the big oil companies, the major monopolies on the stock market, and look at who started those companies, who controls them, who has trusts, who really dominates and has the power in the United States. And those forces are not rags to riches stories. They're not inventors. They're not somebody who worked hard their whole life and had some new idea and worked their butt off and banked in on it. That's not really who runs the United States. The forces that dominate capitalism in the United States and the global capitalist economy around the world are entrenched circles of power. And these entrenched circles of power, if you look at how they acquired their wealth, starting in Europe and eventually moving on to the global scene, it wasn't hard work. There used to be feudalism. Feudalism was a system of subsistence farming where you had lords and serfs. And as they were breaking up feudalism in Europe, the way that the land in Europe was acquired by the capitalists who came to dominate as capitalism emerged to replace feudalism was very brutal. You can read about what they call the Enclosure Movement or the clearing of the commons. When all over Britain, peasants who'd lived on this land, their families had been there for hundreds and thousands of years, were being forced off the land. And how people were just being killed. In fact, the reason that a lot of people in the United States have Scottish last names is because at the time the United States was being settled, there had just been an uprising in Scotland, the Jacobite uprising led by Bonnie Prince Charlie. And after that uprising, the Scottish Highlands were just cleared, and they were just forcing thousands of people off the land. Thousands of people were slaughtered as capitalism, based in England, seized control of the Scottish Highlands. It was just a mass genocide that took place, clearing the Scottish Highlands. But, the reason that there hasn't been a king in Britain named King Henry after King Henry VIII was because during King Henry VIII's rule, as they were clearing the lands, they were executing people in huge numbers for crimes like vagrancy, which was the crime of being homeless. Thousands of people were just kicked off the land, and the land was handed over to elite, wealthy capitalist families. That's how capitalism was created in Britain. That's how it was created in France. That's how it was created so many other parts of Europe. As the capitalist system emerged, it was emerged, the way it emerged was basically capitalists brutally seizing control of the land, of the natural resources in a very violent way in which thousands of people were displaced. And, you can go on to when the United States was being settled, as the wealthy financial elites were spreading across the world, as they were seizing control of the United States, as the big railroad companies acquired so much of the land of the United States. This was not done in a legal, honest, fair and square way. We know how the Native Americans were robbed of their land, cheated, ripped off, treaties broken. We know about how the railroad companies acquired so much of the land and how these homestead deals that were made were not fair. The rich interests that control the United States, that control so much of the world, they did not acquire their wealth through means of honesty. If you look at, Standard Oil, which is the Rockefeller's oil company that, now the legacy of it is ExxonMobil. If you look at the way that they've come to emerge, that's Chase Bank is completely tied in with them now. J.P. Morgan Chase, the Morgans, another wealthy family. These folks did not come about their wealth, just through hard, sweat of their brow work or through brilliance, through inventing something. These folks are very, very corrupt, and they acquired their wealth by maneuvering and manipulating governments. Theft. It was mass theft. And that needs to be said. I mean, look at the lists, and it's of interest. Look at the lists of companies that were involved in the slave trade, for example, the African slave trade. Look at that. Look at how many of the Wall Street entities, the top big corporations of today, have roots in the slave trade, right? I mean, you can go down the line. The way that the entrenched circles of wealth and power acquired their wealth and power was not through honesty, not through hard work, not through sweat of their brow. Yes, there are millionaires who worked really hard. Yes, there's even the occasional billionaire who got where they are through hard work. But the entrenched circles of power that really run the USA, they didn't get it through hard work. I can guarantee you that. So that's the first myth. The capitalists did not acquire their wealth through hard work. But let's go on to the second myth, though. The idea is, you run out of money because socialism just means taking from these people who worked so hard. No, it's not. If all they had done in Russia in 1917 was redistribute wealth that was already there, Russia would still be a deeply, deeply impoverished country. If all they had done in China in 1949 was redistribute wealth that was already there, China would already and remain a deeply impoverished country. That's not what happened. If you look at what socialism was in the Soviet Union and what socialism is today in China, socialism is not simply redistributing wealth that already exists. Socialism is society taking control of the major centers of economic power, of banks, factories, major industries, and controlling the economy. And controlling the economy, having an economy that doesn't function according to profits, but is controlled by a central plan, and doing that to unleash the forces that create wealth. Stalin's 5-year plans. Prior to the Soviet Union, there was barely any steel industry in Russia. By 1936, Russia was creating more steel than any other country in the entire world. Stalin and the 5-year plans in Russia built the largest hydroelectrical power plant in the world at that time, the Dnieper Dam. At this point, China, which did not have a single steel mill in 1949, half the steel in the world is produced in their government-controlled steel mill. At the time that China was created, the People's Republic was created in 1949, China didn't have any hydroelectrical power plants. Today, China has the world's largest hydroelectrical power plant, the Three Gorges Dam. All kinds of wealth creation takes place under socialism because the economy is centrally planned. Socialism is not the redistribution of wealth. It's not progressive taxation. Every system has the redistribution of wealth to some degree. I'm sitting here in a public park. This public park is paid for with tax dollars from people like me, right? I've been taxed, and my wealth has been redistributed to pay for this park. Does that make the USA a socialist country? No. Some countries have a lot of wealth redistribution. Some countries have a little bit of wealth redistribution. Sometimes wealth is distributed to low-income folks with, food subsidies and welfare programs. Sometimes it's redistributed to the highest people with, bank bailouts and things like that. Wealth redistribution is something that goes on under every system to some degree or other. Capitalism, there's always been a degree of wealth redistribution under capitalism. There will be under socialism. But socialism and capitalism is not a difference. It's not about redistributing wealth. And it's about state control and rational ownership and rational control and human reason dictating how production is carried out. Under capitalism, the economy functions for the purpose of making profits for a group of owners. And all kinds of irrational things happen because the capitalists do it to make money. They don't care about anything else. They're just trying to make money. There's complete irrationality. But socialism is where you have central planners who sit there and go, what's best for the overall country? What'll have the best results for the population? And they go to the corporations, they go to the businesses, and they make them carry out a rational plan that's good for the country. And that's the difference between capitalism and socialism. Socialism is a planned economy. It's when the economy functions for the benefit of the public, not for the benefit of profits. And yes, under socialism, there are businesses. Under the Soviet Union, obviously everything was completely nationalized, but that system, that Soviet model has been pretty played out. If you go to Cuba today, there's a lot of private businesses, but the Cuban government, at the end of the day, has the power, right? They set the economic plans, they control the industries. You go to China today, a lot of private businesses, but at the end of the day, the Chinese government dictates what goes on. Those companies are told what to do by the state, right? The state controlling the means of production. Society as a whole controlling the economy. That's what socialism is. It's not progressive taxation. This idea that, oh my gosh, if the government taxing people is socialism, the post office is socialist. This is a lot of silliness, and this is something the Republicans started running back during the Cold War, right? They've always favored, deregulation, privatization, so they had the brilliant idea of calling people that favored a more liberal model or a welfare state communists. That's just nonsense. That's not actually what socialism is. Socialism is when society seizes control of the means of production. And it's a rationally planned economy. So first of all, those rich people, let's review those rich people, the richest of the rich, the people that really control the United States. They acquired their wealth through all kinds of shady, forceful, thieving means. They're not just hardworking inventors, number one. And number two, socialism is not just simply taking other people's money. Socialism is rational control of the economy. So people who give you this socialism is theft myth, they're just completely wrong. They're completely wrong. They don't know what they're talking about, but that's okay. And there's a lot of confusion nowadays. A lot of these Bernie Sanders types and all of that, they've kind of taken it on, right? The Republicans have been saying that if you want free healthcare, you're a socialist. And so a lot of people are saying, yeah, I'm a socialist. I want free healthcare. Well, no, socialism is an entirely new economic order in which the irrationality of profits does not control the economy. That's what socialism actually means. So let's be very clear about that. And socialism has been successful. The Soviet Union became a world superpower. They created the first spacecraft, Sputnik, the first person in space, Yuri Gagarin. They defeated Adolf Hitler. They created the AK-47 rifle, the most efficient weapon in the world. What else has been achieved by socialism? China, at this point, has the largest telecommunications manufacturer. And it's creating wealth in abundance, right? I mean, every day another Chinese person becomes a millionaire. Every week you have another Chinese billionaire. 700 million people lifted out of poverty. Russia and China, two countries that at the beginning of the 20th century were dirt poor. China was actually one of the poorest countries in the world. They called it the sick man of Asia. They're now superpowers. They became superpowers because they had planned socialist economies. It wasn't because they had progressive taxation, redistributed wealth that was already there, because they didn't have very much wealth at the beginning of the 20th century. But socialism, by rationally controlling the economy, mobilizing the population, created wealth. Socialism creates wealth. It's capitalism, it's destroying wealth. Under capitalism, you can have speculation and usury, where capitalists make money by not creating anything, right? They make money by, derivative rip-off schemes and betting and the prison industrial complex and heroin and all kinds of mechanisms now where capitalists can make lots of money by not really creating anything and in a lot of cases making things actually worse. A prison industrial complex, can you imagine that? Where they make profits from locking people in prison. You can go down the line. The heroin epidemic. Capitalists were pushing doctors to overprescribe opioid medications. The capitalists, they have figured out ways of making wealth or making money for themselves without actually advancing the wealth of society. Concrete wealth is not being created, but they continue to make money. Under socialism, you have a rational planner, a government of strength that dictates economic activity, that comes up with a plan for what's best for the country, mobilizes the population. And yes, you have people that start companies in accordance with that plan, and you have different corporations, but at the end of the day, everything is set to serve the population, and the state makes sure that the people's needs come first, not profits. That's what socialism is. It's people over profits. It's a rationally planned economy. That's the difference between socialism and capitalism, and it has been quite successful. Socialism is not theft.